He's really someone that can do the lot.
They cut their nose off to spite their face, aren't they? I think really they should have given themselves a decision to make.
Isak is quite a good comparison, but Chido's a very unique profile. He really has a grasp of those natural instincts, whereas maybe Hojlund doesn't know how to fashion these chances and generate chances for himself.
Despite Manchester United's recent FA Cup exit, the main takeaway for fans was Chido Obi, the 17-year-old who snubbed Arsenal for the Theatre of Dreams and is deadly in front of goal. With a goal-scoring drought ongoing at the club, what kind of impact could this star in the making have, even if he cannot play in the Europa League this season? With Ruben Amorim's team struggling on the injury front, the player, who officially signed in October 2024 and only broke into the Man United under-21s team in late January of this year, has been fast-tracked to the first team. So far, he's made a 1-minute appearance against Tottenham Hotspur, 20 minutes against Everton in the Premier League, and 52 minutes in Man United's exit from the FA Cup against Fulham, where he arguably, despite the loss, put in his most impressive performance. Despite being 5 years younger than striker Rasmus Hojlund and having little first-team experience, he still managed double the amount of touches Hojlund took in the fixture and looked like a much more dangerous threat. So much so that head coach Ruben Amorim was asked about if Obi could replace Hojlund at some point in the starting 11, and this was his response.
Anything can happen in the next games. During trainings, we don't have a lot of time to train, but we need to see the opposition, feel the moment of the player physically in this moment with a lot of games, because we are going to start playing Thursday, Wednesday, Sunday. Anything can happen, but I will focus on just the next game, and not trying in that way like I'm going to change the striker. I will choose the best players to win the next match. We have a problem with goals. Today we create situations, but even in the last game, sometimes you felt that just in set pieces we are going to make some danger. So I think the first step is to create situation. Today we create, but we have to improve that to help our forwards and strikers to score.
The hype is growing around Obi, with the youngster arguably providing the only bit of hope that fans can cling to at the moment. There are calls for his minutes to be increased, perhaps in the club's Europa League fixtures against Real Sociedad in the last 16. However, as announced by the club this week, he will be unable to play in the competition at all this season, as he was not one of the 3 changes United were allowed to make to their European squad in early February. So how has this happened? Man United are allowed to submit 2 different lists of players for the Europa League. List A, the 25-man squad, and also List B, which features players born on or after January 1st, 2003, and who have been at United for 2 years since they were 15. This means that Chido Obi would not be eligible for List B, having only joined 5 months ago, but could have been in List A. However, the 3 changes that the club chose to make were new signings Patrick Dorgu, Aidan Heaven, and 17-year-old Jack Fletcher, son of former United midfielder and current first-team coach Darren Fletcher. Despite his age, Fletcher isn't eligible for List B, as he only joined the club from rivals Manchester City in the summer of 2023. Therefore, he hasn't spent 2 years with United. But why Fletcher over Obi? The club's excuse, according to their website, is that Chido Obi is ineligible for the competition, as he cannot be added to the B list due to only signing for the academy last year. There are other reports that at the time of UEFA's deadline for the squad, February 6th, he had yet to be named in a senior squad, and there was little talk about a promotion. Yet, 10 days later, the player is in Ruben Amorim's squad for their Premier League meeting with Spurs. Make it make sense. Whilst Fletcher has been in squads during October and November of 2024, and once again for the Spurs game, he has never made a first-team appearance. To chat more about the Obi oversight, we have talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook joining me. First up, Crookie, are you buying that the club genuinely did not see Chido Obi as a potential first-team player February 6th, even though they included him in a Premier League squad 10 days later?
Yes, I think I am. I think they want to be careful with his development. I think we saw in that FA Cup defeat against Fulham that there's clearly a talent there. I think he asked more questions of the Fulham defence than Rasmus Hojlund had before he was replaced, but he's also very raw, and I think what they're reluctant to do is chuck a young player into the deep end and maybe risk stunting his development. I mean, look at Kobbie Mainoo, probably not been the same player this season that he was last. Obviously, that's partly because he's not been fully fit. I think partly because he was fatigued after the Euros. But even with him, I think ideally he wouldn't have played as many minutes over the last couple of seasons as he's had to, really by necessity, because United have been struggling so much.
Are you surprised that Jack Fletcher was included instead? We all hope he could be a fantastic player for Manchester United, and it does sound like he's a real talent, but could it be perceived as a bit of a bad luck that he was selected ahead of Obi, considering his dad's role at the club?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit unfair to suggest there's any nepotism involved. Obviously, Darren Fletcher has got a senior position at the football club, probably the only mainstay really of all the constant chopping and changes when it comes to managers. I was speaking to talkSPORT's Perry Groves actually over the weekend, and he watched the FA Youth Cup game between Manchester United and Arsenal, and he was waxing lyrical about Jack Fletcher in particular. So I think everybody knows his talent. Obviously, he's been in and around the group for a little bit longer than Obi has, and maybe that is why United made that decision. They also didn't bargain for the fact that Amad Diallo would pick up a season-ending injury, and obviously different type of players, Fletcher and Obi, maybe going forward, Obi would be more of a like-for-like replacement for Amad, but that's probably hindsight.
Is there a worry that United have once again made another bad decision that lacks better foresight, especially if Chido Obi continues to feature in the Premier League?
A lack of foresight, I think, has been the story of United's season, hasn't it? Right from when they decided to give Erik ten Hag a new contract. Obviously, that ended up costing them a lot more in compensation when they decided to relieve him of his duties. Also, you look at the transfer policy in the summer. Ten Hag and Dan Ashworth, who's not there anymore, had a big say in that. Ruben Amorim coming in mid-season, even though he'd been discounted as a potential Manchester United manager much earlier when they were looking at potentially changing Ten Hag in the summer because his style of play didn't suit the squad. So certainly a lack of foresight, I think, is something that can be levelled at Ineos's door. And they cut their nose off to spite their face, aren't they? I think really they should have given themselves a decision to make, included Obi in the squad, and then decide actually, well, how much of a role do we want this guy to play?
So if they knew what they do now about Amad Diallo's injury and Obi's development in the first team, would they have changed their decision if they had the time again?
I think had they known that Amad was going to pick up this injury, as I say, very unfortunate timing, and we won't see him again this season. Had they known that Obi was going to come in and make the impact he has, albeit from cameo roles off the subs bench, I think they would have at least given themselves the option of including him in the squad, and therefore it would be up to Ruben Amorim if he wanted to take him to Sociedad, for example, if he wanted to leave him in cold storage for the return game at Old Trafford. This tie now is so important, isn't it? This is United's season. They're out of the FA Cup, so they're not going to retain that trophy. They're not bad enough to go down. They're not going to qualify for Europe through the league. So the only realistic route to silverware and European football next season, so important financially, is by winning the Europa League. And I think there's an argument to be made that if Obi was part of their squad, he would give themselves a better opportunity to do that.
Thanks for that insight, Crookie. Now, although the Europa League is not a possibility for Obi, we will hopefully still see him feature in the Premier League because, let's face it, the teenager is a real talent. In November 2023, when he was still with Arsenal playing in their under-16 side, he managed 10 goals in a single game against Liverpool. In their under-17s team, he scored 32 goals in just 18 matches. Upon his arrival at Man United, his first start for the under-18s was against Nottingham Forest. He was on the pitch for the first 46 minutes. Within 14 seconds, he had scored, and within 15 minutes, he had scored a hat-trick. At the time of filming, at United, he has scored 12 goals in 15 appearances. Music to the ears of fans who have been used to watching Hojlund play, who has 7 goals in 35 appearances this season. Joining us to chat more about Chido Obi is Finn, also known as Academy Scoop on X. Great to have you with us, Finn. For those who haven't watched Chido Obi in Man United or Arsenal's academies, how do you sum the player up?
He's quite a unique profile, to be honest. It's not often you see a 17-year-old with his kind of stature and his build. I think he stands at around 6'4", and he's really someone that can do the lot. You know, he can hold the ball up, but first and foremost, he's a goal scorer. We saw him last season for Arsenal, still technically an under-16 player, become their leading under-18 goal scorer of all time. This season, he's built on that record and become England's, highest scoring under-18 player of all time. So these are pretty unheard of numbers. So yeah, first and foremost, a goal scorer.
After the Fulham game, there were a lot of comparisons between Rasmus Hojlund and Chido Obi. What qualities do you think he brings over Hojlund?
I think when we think about strikers, the natural instincts like movement off the ball, knowing where to be at what time, and knowing where the ball's going to drop, those are kind of things that you either have or you don't. Obviously, you can improve, but I think what we see in Chido is that he really has a grasp of those natural instincts, whereas maybe Hojlund doesn't know how to fashion these chances and generate chances for himself. He kind of needs the service. Otherwise he's not really involved in a game. What we saw against Fulham when when Chido came on, is that instantly he was making himself a nuisance in the box. The ball was falling to him at the right time, and that can seem like luck, but it's definitely not. It's kind of his own know-how in terms of his positioning, and so I think that's the main thing. Is that Chido Obi doesn't necessarily need all the service to come to him to be able to really cause problems for an opposition.
After watching him so far this season, do you expect him to become a consistent starter towards the end of the season in the Premier League?
I think a 17-year-old should never be expected to do that, especially for a club the size of Manchester United. But it seems like it's a very real possibility given the situation, unless Hojlund's fortunes turn around. Xerxes not really an out-and-out number 9. He's been quite good in the number 10 positions. I think it's a very real possibility because, physically, Chido's not that far off it. You look at his stature, his build. He was able to contest with Bassi, who's one of the most physical centre-backs that you'll find, quite well. He really didn't look out of place or really out of his depth. So I don't think it should happen, but I think it's likely that he probably will, yeah.
So what type of player do you think he will be in the next 5 years or so? Is there a player that springs to mind that you would compare him to?
Yeah, the really common one that he gets is Alexander Isak, obviously at Newcastle, who's this season come on leaps and bounds as one of the best strikers in the Premier League and in Europe, certainly. They have kind of a similar style on the ball, quite deceptively technical for their height. It's quite uncommon for a striker that tall to be really gifted, but Chido certainly is in a similar way to Isak. And then you've got the kind of ruthless goal-scoring instinct off the ball, picking up the right positions, making the right runs, really smart runs, and also getting involved quite deep in the pitch is something that I've seen Chido develop at this season. I think last season at Arsenal, a lot of what I saw was poaching, getting on the end of attacks and being that final kind of cherry on top, whereas this season he's got a lot more involved in possession, dropping deep in his half and picking up the ball and kind of circulating for a new attack. So yeah, I'd say Isak is quite a good comparison, but he's a very unique, Chido's a very unique profile, so it's hard to find a really good comparison.
Of course, Jack Fletcher has been selected over Chido Obi for the Europa League squad. We haven't heard a lot about him. Is it a surprise that he's been picked?
I'm not sure I'd say it's a surprise. I'd be interested to know when that decision was made, because I'd imagine if it was not made in the last week or so, they'd probably put Chido in that list. But no, he certainly deserves an opportunity. Obviously, the son of Darren Fletcher and his brother Tyler's at the club as well. But Jack is an advanced kind of playmaker. He likes to roam and kind of pick up the ball in the pockets and create chances. Great eye for a pass, really good vision, and can really have great impact in the final third. I was at the Emirates on Friday for the FA Youth Cup game against Arsenal, and he opened the scoring for United with this fantastic weak foot finish on the edge of the box. Picked the ball up, shimmied, and kind of cut onto his weaker right foot and smashed it into the top right corner. So yeah, certainly a great player with a top ceiling. And I wouldn't say it's a surprise that he's involved. I think he thoroughly deserves the opportunity.
So why do you think he hasn't been used more then? Is it due to his position, that they're trying to stagger his development? We've seen him on the bench a few times, but he's yet to make that debut. Yeah,
I'd imagine it's simply a case of kind of managing his development quite gradually and easing him into the squad rather than dropping him straight into the deep end. Physically, he's still quite slight, quite slender, so he'll take time to kind of get up to the physical levels required of a first team player. But yeah, I think the opportunity, it's coming around the right time for him, where he's starting to really get into his stride this season and could certainly make an impact in the first team. We've seen him against a few first team oppositions for the under-21s, and he hasn't looked out of his depth. So I'd be really interested to see him get his debut.
Finn, thank you so much for your expert knowledge there. Whilst Jack Fletcher looks like another exciting prospect at Manchester United, let's hope that the omission of Chido Obi doesn't come back to bite Ruben Amorim and the club. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for joining me, and make sure you subscribe for all the latest football news here on talkSPORT.